Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. About a month and a half ago, we were discussing what's going to be the situation for the summer in Ukraine, and I said that because the help was approved for Ukraine, we will see that help coming in, and as Ukraine is going to get more and more resources, we're going to see the slowdown of changes on the front lines. We're going to see less territory being taken from Ukraine, and we will kind of be more in peace with ourselves, as we will not have this awful dread hanging over us that nothing is going on. All the help to Ukraine is either not going in or going in too slow. And now we kind of get a little bit more in between balanced perspective. And generally speaking, we were right. For the most part, it was exactly the optimistic scenario that we outlined, minus certain aspects, and we're going to talk about these certain aspects. So aspect number one, why Russia is continuing advancements. And the first thing is that when Russia attacked the Kharkiv operation, this was expected. This was something that the Ukrainian intelligence has reported to us. Their initial plan was to have a grouping in the north. They wanted to attack Kharkiv, to do a split attack. They wanted to attack towards Kharkiv to block the Ukrainian forces in Kharkiv. And then they wanted to kind of go towards Kupiansk from the north to undercut the defensive positions of Ukrainians in this area. Their second stage of attack was supposed to be going towards Sumy to additionally distract Ukrainian forces and making sure that they're going to get engaged. The unfortunate, as now we learn, the unfortunate for Russians is that it was super well known in advance that while the military forces that were there on the border with Russia, they did fail, and Ukraine has been investigating why this failure occurred, why there was no proper defensive positions set up so early. However, Kirilo Budanov and GUR intelligence service and his forces, like as a special forces, they were actually aware and prepared. So as the Russians came in to the Kharkiv area from the north, from two sides, the special forces of Ukraine were already there present, and they were meeting the oncoming Russian forces. Since then, Ukrainians have reformed the armed forces in the area. New commanders came in, and they were able to move up, stabilize, and push Russians back. Russians still had certain reserve left in the back that they wanted to consider, and after trying for a little bit to move Russian reserves into these pockets back again to try to push Ukrainians once again with a renowned effort, now that Ukrainian forces were also reinforced with the regular military, they were just not really able to do anything. There was no progress. So since then, they kind of reinforced the area with defensive forces, but they didn't really dedicate a lot more resources to kind of go for advancement. More of a sort of like a bridgehead that they want to hold. So they're trying to dig in, and they're just rotating the troops around that area. Additionally, their plan to attack towards Sumy was completely cancelled. So Russians took all of these reserves that were here, plus certain reserves that were located on other directions, and they moved the reserves towards the eastern side, and they now try to concentrate on a fewer directions. You might have heard certain news about the fact that Russia is concentrating forces in the area around here towards Borova, which is located right there. So they're looking kind of this midsection, and there were rumors that it's going to be around 10,000 strong troops with a lot of tanks and so on. And these 10,000 is also part of that forces that didn't go towards Kharkiv area. But most importantly, they additionally reinforced the troops that were located in Avdiivka direction, because in Avdiivka direction, while Ukrainians were able somewhat to contain the advances of Russians, they were never able to really stop them. And this direction is now a proper priority. This is a main direction of attack for Russians, and they are continuously reinforcing this direction. So I've been working on a little bit of a project with regards to what's happening there. So, and I have some data to show. again, this is going to be something that I'm going to show from time to time. So here I made a chart with a lot of data, and this is chart that is showing the number of combat engagements per week. This takes in the last, I believe, 7 weeks, from week 19 to week 25. And just to kind of show to you with different directions, you can see the general perspective was that Russians had a very active these 2 weeks that were at the beginning. Then they had this lull, and you see almost for every chart that there is this lull in the middle of the last like 3 to 5 weeks. And that lull is specifically when Russians were like, okay, we're advancing, we need to reassess our plans, we need to reassess where we're engaging and so on. And this is where they did a lot of rotations. And you can easily see this by the number of engagements on different axes. You can see that Kharkiv slowed down significantly and doesn't really rise. And important here, the note about the bias of this chart. This chart does not distinguish between whether it was the Russian engagements or it was the Ukrainians on the attack towards Russians. So this chart shows both. While we know that Ukrainians are now transitioning from a full-blown defense where they don't really counterattack Russians and just destroy the oncoming zombies, they are now also somewhat transitioning to a more active stance. For example, in the Kharkiv direction, we know for sure that Ukrainians are continuously, slowly, street by street, retaking the city of Vovchansk. It's already over 85% cleared up. Additionally, there is more reports that on the eastern side, on the western side, around the village of Luboki, Ukrainians are also pushing Russians out. They're also trying to conserve their forces. They're still not in the position to do any major pushes because, remember, Ukrainians are not in a good situation. The situation overall for Ukraine just moved from very terrible to pretty bad. So it's an improvement, but it's still pretty bad, right? So we're still far away from Ukrainians pushing back, counterattacking, and being in a more or less dominant or driver's position here in the front line. And you can see that in general, that's the trend everywhere. What we see is that Chasiv Yar, with the exception of this bar over here that I'm going to talk about in a second, overall in Chasiv Yar, there is also a slowdown. So Kharkiv slowed down, Chasiv Yar slowed down, Rabotine also relatively slowed down. Kherson is a little bit, there's a separate situation, I should probably take it out. Vuhledar also not really increase and so on. And a lot of these have instead, we see even here on chart, that Russia really intensified their attacks around Avdiivka direction. So they've been like having a little bit of a lull, and then they started additionally pushing. So they are concentrating on a lot of these Avdiivka axes. But let's talk about the Chasiv Yar direction. So Chasiv Yar, and this is the problem with my data that I'm having, because the data that I'm having is they're counting combat engagements from this whole area over here. And recently, the engagements around Chasiv Yar, that was the spike on the graph that you see, which is right over here. This spike happened when Russians actually attack right over here towards Toretsk. This direction has been silent for quite a while, and it's been kind of activated by Russians. And to be honest, a lot of analysts are actually scratching their heads because defenses here are basically untouched. Russians had a little bit of a surprise factor where they were able to take they reported that they were able to take the village of Shumy. And village of Shumy, just for your sake, in 2017, village of Shumy reported 2 people living there. Two people. So that's to kind of understand the scale. So there is still plenty of defenses here that has been untouched during this war. So what Russians are really trying to achieve here is really, really weird. So while there is this spike, in generally around Chasiv Yar, situation have been the optimistic scenario that we were expecting. Russians really tried to attack. Their attack plan was 3-pronged. They wanted to go in the middle. They wanted to reach this river that is located here. I'm going to paint it in blue so you can see. So this is a little bit of a channel here, like a river, small river. They wanted to lock in this district that is right next to the river on the eastern side of the of the city, and then they wanted through Bogdanivka to go into Kalinivka and kind of get this area over here, and they wanted to capture Ivanivske, which they succeeded, and then move from Ivanivske along the road to capture this area over here, therefore starting to encircle this Chasiv Yar, the major fortification in the area and defensive positions for Ukrainians. However, their plan failed miserably. On the north, as they entered Kalinivka, it turned out that Ukrainians were ready for them. They prepared a trap and they have since been pushed back. On the south, they were able to take Ivanivske, but all their attempts failed because of the fact that Ukraine controls some of the hills that are located south of this, and they basically see any Russian movements right away, and they're able to target them. So they needed to take away this southern axis, southern approach from Ukrainians, and they tried to do it where they tried to attack towards Klishivka, but then the Ukrainians again counterattacked and pushed Russians back, and Russians were never able to take the hills in the area. So the southern movement, while they were partially successful in taking Ivanivske, they were never able to move forward. And their central movement, they were able to reach about the half of this district that they wanted, but now Ukrainians are also reporting that they're pushing the Russians back. So Chasiv Yar, all in all, the situation is changing for Ukrainian side, and Russians, despite their continuous attempts, are not really advancing. So when we're talking about this direction, now there is a lot of, again, explanations that are being flown around, and you can take any one of this. Your guess is as good as mine. So explanation number one is that Russians are really interested in this area, not because of the Chasiv Yar axis, but because of the Ocheretina axis. So what they want to do essentially is get here, get to this road, and they're hoping if they're able to take Toretsk, to kind of create this cauldron-like situation, like a pocket situation for Ukrainians, and try to collapse this area, therefore providing the blockage of the road and taking over some of the significant parts of the land from Ukrainians. But it's a very far-fetched plan, very, very far-fetched plan. So that is one explanation. Explanation number two is that because Russian command has gotten, Russian Ministry of Defense got a new chief, a lot of the generals right now are really worried that they're going to be shifted around, that if they don't provide any kind of results, then they are kind of stuck where they are, or they can lose their positions, or they can be sent to fight, like, or demoted or whatever. And instead, so the general, the specific general on this direction was like, okay, I'm going to take initiative. So I'm going to just command my troops and going to take something. Like, that's why they screamed so loud about capturing the village of Shumi. Again, 2 people living there registered. And that's why, because this direction doesn't really make sense on its own. So the idea here being that potentially it's been some of the initial aggression. And then the explanation number 3 is that Russia still want to maintain the general image of a country that is on the offensive, the country that is attacking, and they're trying to build this specific image for the negotiation phase. Because, okay, so with regards to negotiations, Russia is looking for pocket Chamberlains. Russia is looking for a way to see how they can influence Western allies. I don't think it's working. But there is plenty of dumbasses that are ready to parrot Russian propaganda. But generally speaking, what Russia tries to present is that, look, we're advancing, so let's talk. You know, when last time when Russia really wanted negotiations and they tried to propose something and they said we're always ready for negotiations, it was right before the Ukrainian offensive. Russia is using this negotiation as a distraction because at that moment it wasn't clear whether or not Ukraine will have enough resources or not to break Russian position. So they said, okay, we need to make sure our diplomacy buys us as much time as possible so we dilute the political image in the Western world as much as possible. And they're now starting doing it again. They're starting negotiations. As we are seeing that Russians are having huge trouble, they are not able to advance, that they have only one direction left, despite the fact that the summer is in a full swing, and they are already running out of steam. We're going to touch about it a little bit more. So they're like, okay, let's try to make sure that we can prolong the help for Ukraine as much as possible. Let's try to dilute the image. It's a clear indicator that there is a very clear understanding that the Russian forces are not capable of achieving what they want right now. So they're just trying to bullshit their way around it. Again, any explanation you prefer, please take it. I don't have any preferred one or the one that I think more relevant. I think it's a more maybe combination of all of them, to be honest. But on the Avdiivka axis, first thing that we need to understand, can Russia take Pokrovsk? This is kind of the main target. This is the main hub of Russians in the area. I would strongly say no, because while Russians are moving towards Pokrovsk, they still haven't reached like a main that was really solidly built fortification lines in the area, like proper fortifications that Ukrainians have built. I know it looks like a lot, especially from Avdiivka. That's quite a lot. But they still haven't reached them. They're close, but still haven't reached them. The only kind of danger that is being outlined overall is that there is this village of Vozdvizhenka for Russians that they would want to capture. So right now the question will be, will Ukrainians will be able to defend Vozdvizhenka? That is important because that would cut down if Russians would be allowed to attack further, that would be allowing them to cut the main supply road and main highway in the area. That would be not preferred. That would complicate Ukrainian logistics, and in general, it's not a very good position for Ukrainians to be in. So hopes are that Ukrainians will dedicate enough forces with General Syrsky now in the area to defend Vozdvizhenka and prevent Russians from capturing this highway. That's what we should be looking at. So for people that are expecting that Russia will capture Pokrovsk, not going to happen. I can guarantee you that. But despite that, Russia still has reserves. We're talking about tens of thousands of people. And the good practice, like the good understanding, suggests that Russia should stop. Because they cannot do large-scale maneuvers, they should stop. They should regroup, they should prepare for defenses, and maybe not attack as much. However, they're still attacking. And then here the additional explanation to the group might be coming. That maybe the new agreement that Putin made with South Korea is that potentially the South Koreans will come into the Russian military, and the South Koreans will work in as an engine of the Russian machine. So they will be driving trucks, they will be producing weapons and so on to get this free, cheap labor force for like digging trenches and stuff like that. That's potential that we might see on the front line. It's right now rumored, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But all in all, we have seen that the general trend lines there here in the black are slowly going towards the decline, and Russians, despite the certain facts, the certain spikes in a couple of directions here and there, overall, Russians are being exhausted, and this doesn't being help. I'm going to link this video in the description. You can watch it. So Russians showed so-called the deplorable cellars where Russian injured are located. And these injured people that Russia is locating here, they are being basically forced to go into the, I don't even know how you call them, like cripple battalions. So these cripple battalions supposedly need to be contained, pushed with these, need to contain these people that are refusing to fight or just received medication. And they want to send essentially cripples to fight against Russia. There is a lot of information about this video and the topic, and it's actually quite crazy because there is already like 6 of these facilities that have been discovered. So Russia, if things are going as well as the propagandists and the official Russian channels are claiming, there are thousands of Russians willing to fight. Why would they need to create cripple battalions to fight? Beyond that, we know that another indicator that shows that there is a problem with Russians on getting people to the military is when Russians are signing contract with the military in Russia, they are getting a single time bonus. And while bonus in itself doesn't tell us about anything, this bonus is defined by each region of Russia separately. And because they have, each of the region essentially is forced to have a certain number of recruits, the regions are following market requirements, market pressures, and they are increasing the level of that single payment to attract more volunteers that would like to go and fight in Ukraine. So we've seen a very steady and very intense increase of this single-time payments for Russians. It's been kind of crazy that it has been going up. So that's an additional indicator that Russia is struggling with the replenishment of their forces. And as Ukraine gets more capabilities, as Ukraine will be able to destroy more and more Russians, we will see Russians struggle more and more with attracting manpower. That's why I believe this North Korean deal is going to be interesting to see whether or not Russians can engage the manpower from North Korea. And also Russia is looking for mercenaries all over the world as well. That's the situation on the front line. So I'm expecting that within a month or so, we're going to see further slowdown. We're going to see Ukrainians go a little bit more aggressively on the counterattacks. So far, my data doesn't really show a lot of these counterattacks if we look at the numbers that are here behind the chart. So we see that there has been, whereas like this is the additional chart that I did for the land taken. So we see there was 3.5 square kilometers retaken by Ukrainians on Liman-Seversk axis. This was the forest, some parts of the forest that Ukrainians have retaken. But in general, I would expect that a lot of these numbers, I'm tracking like how much area Russians are taking here in this chart and so on. But all in all, Ukraine has been doing quite well. They are right now in talks with becoming a member state of EU, which is a great topic to talk about in some of the streams. There is additional topics about that Syrskyi really wants to get more training for Ukrainian armed forces. There is a whole another talk about Ukraine now fighting corruption more openly. Some of the senior staff are now being addressed by corruption. Again, people, corruption is counterintuitive. If you don't hear about anything being done about corruption, that doesn't mean that corruption doesn't exist. That means it's not being fought for. So if you see more news about, the corrupt official is now being prosecuted, it shows that corruption is being fought and exposed. It's counterintuitive. This is something we need to know. And then there is also the whole discussion that we should probably have about the general that was replaced on Ukrainian side. And we can talk about it today. I'm going to be watching the debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So please join for the stream today, later on if you're watching. Otherwise, please continue supporting our promotion for the armored vehicle for Ukrainian combat medics. It's still ongoing. We are just 3,500 shy from finalizing it. Whatever the case, I love you all. Slava Ukraini, and I'll see you next time.